Hello everybody, and welcome to the HexRD GUI tutorials. Today we are going to be demonstrating how to perform a structureless calibration. In the last video in this series, we showed how to import and visualize TARDIS data, and we are following through using that exact same data here. If you watched the previous video, you'll remember that we are currently looking at X-ray source 2 here, where the Debye-Scherrer lines are more prominent. Structureless calibration is where we are able to straighten or make vertical Debye-Scherrer lines in our polar image without necessarily knowing what material or structure produced them. And the way this is going to work is that we are going to go through a workflow where we select points along each Debye-Scherrer line across each detector, and we are going to run it through an algorithm that will modify instrument parameters in order to straighten out the lines and make them more vertical. And this will also improve the line out here at the bottom. So first of all, I'm actually going to apply a SNIP algorithm. Last time I showed SNIP 2D, but in this case, since there are two X-ray sources here, SNIP 1D is more preferable, since it only takes into account pixels to the left and the right, pixels along 2 theta. So I'm going to apply SNIP here, and I'm going to change the width to 3 because we determined that's a little bit better. And actually, you can see the lines a little bit better now than you could before. There are still some artifacts here that are produced by the SNIP algorithm. For instance, these Laue spots here are causing the line to shift over a little bit. And also, there's some artifacts around the fiducial wire markers here. You can see there's some artifacts here, over here. Some of these are produced by the plasma as well. But we can ignore these. On image plate 3, I'm only going to pay attention to these 2 lines here, which I know are Debye-Scherrer rings that correspond to these 2 right here. Okay, I'm going to enlarge the canvas a little bit by closing these dock widgets. I'll pop out the messages and shrink it a little bit. You can always restore these dock widgets later if you want them back. Like here's the image mode widget here. And I'm going to start the structureless calibration workflow. We'll begin by going to Run Calibration and click on Structureless here. It's going to start, it's going to start by asking you where you would like to get your picks from. And if you have previously performed a structureless calibration in this session, or if you've loaded a state file where structureless calibration was performed, then previous here will be enabled, and you can select that. Additionally, you can load them from a file. If you go through and pick them, you can save them out to a file, and then you can load them here. Or alternatively, you can select them by hand. And I'll show how to do that at first here, since this is how we typically start. And what appears here on the left when we select that is a zoom canvas. And what's going on here is we have this zoom region here, which is bounded by the magenta square, along with these blue crosshairs in the main canvas. And this magenta square is showing us where the zoom region is over here. And by default, a 2-click mode is enabled, so that if you left-click once on the main canvas, it freezes the position of the zoom box so that you can left-click points within the zoom box in order to generate them. And by default, these subplots here on the left and the bottom are showing the sums across the rows for the right and across the columns for the bottom. But I think it's a little bit more helpful to have this checked off, where when you hover your mouse over the zoom box, it's showing the pixel values instead that intersect with your crosshairs. And this can help you pick points because, as you can see right now from the bottom, for instance, we are at a maxima. And if you can't see that clearly in the image, you can at least look at the plot and see if you're hovering over a maxima, which would help you to pick a point there. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by going through and picking points along the first Debye-Scherrer ring. So I'm going to freeze the zoom box and I'm going to start picking here. You can see from the bottom plot that I'm left clicking on maxima, and as I left click, the points are drawn in the main canvas over here. They're not drawn in the zoom box. But I'm just going to keep on going, and I'm going to left click where I believe the Debye-Scherrer ring center is. And if you have more confidence about a certain region than others, like you may have more confidence in this region, you can left click more times to add more points, and that will essentially increase the weight of that region when you perform the fitting later. You can see that there's a little bit of an artifact here produced by this Laue spot. You may wish to do a little bit of masking first, but we're going to cover masking in another video. If we did masking, that would remove this artifact where part of this Debye-Scherrer line is cut out. So essentially, you're going to keep on going. You'll go across all the detectors for a single Debye-Scherrer ring, left clicking. I'm going to speed along here. Here's the last part. And then when you're done picking points for that ring, right-click once on the main canvas, and you'll see that the cursor changes, and it will tell you that you're now picking Debye-Scherrer ring 2 over here. And then when you left-click, your points are going to be a different color. And you just keep on going and doing that. In this case, we'll have 5 Debye-Scherrer rings that we're picking points for. But instead of going through and picking them all right now, I am going to just load a file where I have picked them previously. So after you finish picking the points and you click OK in the zoom box dialog, or if you just load points, it makes this dialog appear. And by default, the points are drawn over here as well. So you can see where I picked points before. And what this dialog is it gives you all of the information about the structureless calibration before you run it. The main part of this dialog is this tree view here in the middle, which allows you to modify which parameters are refinable. This tree view is similar to the tree view that you can find over here in the instrument configuration. For instance, you can see the beam energy here and the beam vector here. And what you can do is you can modify the values. You can modify whether they're refinable or not, and you can modify constraints, the min and max for those values. And there is also the possibility of adding engineering constraints. Right now we only have the option for TARDIS, but if you add engineering constraints for TARDIS, which it does by default if it sees your detector names look like TARDIS detector names, then it will add this parameter here, distance between plates. And this is constraining the plates to be within a certain distance of each other. Image plate 2 and image plate 4 in particular, the planar ones. And that's because it's definitely within a well-defined region. There's a little bit of variability, but we don't want the image plates to become too far apart or too close to each other when the calibration runs. By default as well, the translations are marked as refinable on all of the detectors, except for image plate 4, Y is not marked as refinable, and that's because it actually gets modified here by the distance between the plates shifting around. So in this dialog here, you also have the option to select a distortion. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. You can edit, save, or load picks here. I'll show a quick example of editing the picks. You can see that when I bring up this little dialog here, that when I select rows in it, it will highlight the picks that it corresponds to. And you can press the delete key to delete some, or you can right-click and delete. You can insert a new point, or you can handpick. Let's say I want to repick one of these points. It will bring up this zoom canvas here, and I can repick this point, and the point just shifted, as you can see there. And also, one more thing in this, you can also add new lines here, although sometimes that might be easier to start over, but you do have the option to append a new line. Okay, now about the distortion. So if you know which layer in your physics package produced the Debye-Scherrer lines that you picked here, then you can apply a distortion to it. For instance, if you know that these were produced by the pinhole material, then you can apply a pinhole distortion here. In this case, I actually know that these were produced by the sample layer. And there are some pinhole Debye-Scherrer rings, but they're very faint in here. If you don't actually know what the distortion type is, then you don't necessarily need to select one. You can still straighten the lines anyways, and if you figure out later what the material was, you can come back and refine it a little further by selecting the correct distortion type. And that will make it a little bit better. In this case, I know that these lines came from the sample layer, and I have recorded the parameters of the sample layer here. And since I have the distortion correction parameters selected here, when we run the calibration, they will be taken into account. And actually, I'm able to shift the polar view according to these distortion correction parameters to make these lines straight according to the parameters. But if I do that right now, you'll see that it doesn't shift by very much. So in this case, it's not really having a huge effect. But if these are selected, then they are taken into account anyways when you run the calibration. Okay, typically when we run these calibrations, we will do them in several steps. In this case, we're going to start off by refining the translations. And then we're going to refine the beam vectors after that. And typically you'll want to just refine a few different things at a time. And you just keep on going until your lines are straight enough. So in this case, I'm going to leave the refinable parameters here as the default ones. And I'm going to go. I'm going to click Run here. It's going to run the calibration and print out some information. And you can see that it made the lines a little bit straighter, actually. Particularly these lines over here. These first two lines were already relatively straight, but these two are a lot straighter now. And if you look in the messages dialog here, you can see there's some useful information printed out. In particular, we might be interested in the cost here. The cost, we want it to be as low as possible, because that means that these lines are as vertical as possible where we pick the points. And you can see that the cost is being reduced as the number of iterations goes along. And then here at the bottom, it also shows you how the parameters changed. You can see how these translation vectors changed. And you can even see how the Debye-Scherrer ring means changed, which you can see at the bottom here. I didn't mention these earlier, but because there's a little bit of uncertainty in what these means actually should be, we do allow these to be varied as well, although you can certainly change that if you would like. So the next step is we are going to mark the azimuth and the polar angle for the beam vector as refinable, because there's a little bit of uncertainty there. And we're going to let it go. Once again, you can see the cost function dropping. Now we're going to turn those off, and we're going to modify the Z double prime tilt parameters for all of the image plates as well. So we're going to let them rotate a little bit. Cost function keeps on dropping. These lines keep on getting straighter and straighter. Now we're going to add back in the beam vectors. Run it again. And then the last step is that we are going to actually remove the refinable parameters from image plate 3, because sometimes that inhibits image plate 2 a little bit from refining properly. Okay, let's see, our cost function dropped quite a bit. I believe it started around 20 and now it's 3.4 here. So that's great. And then what you can do afterwards is you can apply the correction to the polar view here. And you can see that actually these lines are not bad. They're pretty straight now. I'm going to go ahead and close this dialog now. And I'm going to open back up the image mode tab over here. And actually you can see when we applied the distortion to the polar view, that is now saved in this image mode widget here. And it's saved under this custom name right here. This contains those sample layer parameters. You can turn it off here or turn it back on. But you can see that the lines are a lot more vertical now. And we could do things to it to improve the line out even more. Like we could mask out this region of low 2 theta values over here, or I can just zoom in a little bit. We can also mask out these Lowy spots and the lines from the other X-ray source, but I will go over that in a separate video. And if you're curious as well, you can always turn off the SNIP. Modify the brightness and contrast to look at the values without SNIP applied. And yeah, the lines are looking a lot straighter. You could probably improve them even further than this, but this is not bad. This is a decent calibration. So, in the next video, we are going to be going over masking, and we are going to teach you how to mask out these artifacts that would be interfering with the line out here at the bottom. But anyways, thank you. I hope you found this video useful for your work.